Suddenly got a lot quieter in here. I don't know, I enjoy the noise though. That means something's happening when there's the pitter patter of little feet. Well, today I'm excited and I'm saddened to announce that we are going to close the book on our study of Exodus with the story of the Red Sea. Now, of course, that's not where the book of Exodus ends, but that's where we're going to close our study. Last week, Mr. Vince, I think, showed a video of the Passover, and that was the festival that began on the eve of the event that triggered the deliverance of Israel from Egypt. Of course, all the plagues triggered it. But we're all about festivals, right? We talked about the seasons that are coming up, the Thanksgiving season, the Christmas season, and of course the most important one's crawfish season. But we're all about our festivals. And I think that's what we're going to go into next month, is to look at some of the festivals that they had going on in the Bible. Still kicking that around, but we'll see. It's Halloween tonight. As you can see, obviously, Zanita and I have been in this kick where we've been wanting to watch the Halloween movies, right? So we're watching the Halloween movies. Of course, you got to watch the ones where they come in, the slasher movies and stuff like that. And I thought about that. Obviously, these people that, if they have knives or machetes or whoever it is, this had to happen in the North, right? Or the Midwest, at least. There ain't no way in the world that would happen in Louisiana. Because in Louisiana, people are like, I wish somebody would come in my house. I don't care if it's Michael Myers or whoever it is. If they walk through the front door of somebody's house in Louisiana, there's going to be a middle-aged guy sitting in his underwear in the recliner saying, hey, buddy, been waiting on you. You got your choice. You want the AR, the AK, the 45, or the 12 gauge? You know what? I'm in a given mood. You can have them all, right? That's what would happen if somebody walked through the door in Louisiana. A man was going to a Halloween party. It's a good transition. And he dressed in a devil's costume. And on the way to the party, it started to rain, and it was storming, the wind was blowing. He decided he was going to take shelter in the nearest building, which just so happened to be a church where revival had broke out. As soon as he walked through the door, everyone turned to see who was coming in late. That's what we do, right? It's already going, so we're going to turn and see who's coming in late. So everyone's seen him come through the door, and when they saw the devil walk through the door, they spread like a bunch of doves. They were out of there. Well, one lady, she got caught up in her pew in the midst of the confusion, and the man in the costume decided to go make sure that she was okay. He slowly made his way over to where she was, and with him standing, looking down at her, the lady said, Satan, I've been a member of this church for over 30 years, but I want you to know, I've really been on your side the whole time. It seems like that was the attitude of Israel every time the first hint of trouble came up. Fear leads to panic. Panic leads to just boneheaded decisions. It's like in those movies when the guy's coming and he's, got the knife or whatever it is. The people could be in a running car and get out of the running car and run into the woods. It makes no sense. Fear leads to panic, and panic leads to boneheaded decisions. Of course, the 10th plague happened, and then Egypt was like, just go. In fact, here's a whole bunch of gold so you can get out of here. And so they leave, and then, of course, we know that Pharaoh changes his mind one more time. And the Egyptians are in pursuit, and Pharaoh and his army, his chariots, his horsemen, the scripture said, are in pursuit, and they're right up next to the Red Sea, and that's where we're going to pick up this morning. It says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. So when they caught sight of the pursuers, it says they were terrified, they cried out to the Lord for help. Clearly, They thought that they were in a no-win situation, kind of like the Saints are today because the Buccaneers are coming to town. But no, I don't know. I think they got a shot. But clearly, they thought they were in a no-win situation. And true, it seemed like they were caught between a rock and a hard place. They were caught between the sea and the Egyptian army. But what they failed to grasp was that God was sovereignly directing the entire encounter. In fact, I would be so bold as to say that God had orchestrated almost an apparent disaster. And I think that oftentimes we could see that if we looked for it in our lives today. And this is our first one this morning. And this is kind of long. I wanted it all up here so that we could get it. Sometimes God will allow his people to be placed in a dilemma. It's not that he's causing the dilemma to happen, but he will allow his people to be placed in a dilemma so that he can be glorified as he teaches us more about himself and accomplishes his purposes in our lives. I told you guys, I don't know, a few weeks ago, maybe months, these stories start to run together. I told you guys about the time when I was working on the ambulance, and I went into work one day, or maybe I was coming off a shift. That might have been it. I was coming off a shift, and the FBI came in the door. Our company had been committing Medicare fraud. and if you ever needed a sign as to whether or not you should be working somewhere, the FBI coming in the door, that's a pretty good sign that you shouldn't be working there. All right? And then, and I went home, and Zanita said, well, how was work today? I said, well, the FBI came, and then we decided, you know what, we probably don't need to be working there. But if that had not happened, okay, if that had not happened, and I can pinpoint it to that singular event because the next day I went in and put in my 2 weeks notice, but if that had not happened, I do not think that the Lord, I mean, he can do whatever he wants, but Jason wouldn't have been into a place to where the Lord would have been able to accomplish what he has in my life thus far. And Clyde and I were talking about it this morning, 7.5 years we've been in Monterey, Louisiana, and I can pinpoint it all the way back to when the FBI came, between a rock and a hard place. But God used it, and to God be the glory for it. Next verse. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Some translations say in the wilderness. Remember what I said? Fear leads to panic, and panic leads to boneheaded decisions. You know, out of their fear, they make a pretty boneheaded decision. They start this fussing. You know, this hero who delivered them from slavery quickly became an object of their scorn. And I don't know that their memories were that short, but, you know, they're talking about the guy who, whenever he touched his staff into the river Nile, what happened? It turned to blood, right? The power of God was working through this man, and this is the person that they decided they're going to project their fear and project their anger upon. They said, is it because there's not enough graves in Egypt? Why have you taken us away to die in the desert? In other words, what they're saying is, we'd be better off as slaves, as with you in control, Moses. How quickly we forget. I said this to Joe a couple weeks ago. How quickly we forget. It happens a lot, especially in Louisiana. It wasn't but just a couple of years ago that Coach O led LSU to one of arguably the greatest college football seasons of all time. Loses a few games this year, and guess what? They're calling for his job. And guess what? He said, okay, here's my resignation. How quickly we forget. And of course, I'm not comparing the two, but still. How quickly we forget. Let's move on to verse 13. Moses answered the people, don't be afraid. Stand firm, and you'll see the deliverance of the Lord. The deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians will see you today, or you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. So just as they start to panic, throwing the blames around, playing the blame game, you got, in their minds, you have two options. You have death by the sea, or you have death by Egyptian will. And Moses says, you don't need to be afraid. Stand firm. See the Lord's deliverance. Another word for deliverance there is salvation. You will see the Lord's salvation. The Lord's going to fight for you. All you got to do, be still and wait for it to happen. So their fear made them want to run. The Lord said, don't run, but stand firm. Each and every one of us have the same choice. We can either run, we can choose to run, or we can choose not to fear by fulfilling our obligation as one under protection of God by acting in spite of that fear. They stood firm. I want you to notice that God did not give them a plan of attack. He told them that he would be their deliverer, in essence, their salvation, but he said it's because he's going to fight for them. Not a plan of attack, but God is going to fight for them. And remember, their eyes, they have the sea and they have the Egyptians. One side you have the sea, one side the Egyptians. You know what that means? Whichever way they were looking, if it was the Egyptians, if it was the sea, whichever way they were looking at the wrong thing. They were looking in the wrong places, whether it's the sea, whether it's the Egyptians. They're looking in the wrong places. They need to shift their attention away from their fears in order to recognize that God would indeed fight on their behalf. That's a reminder that when you're in a dilemma, when you're boxed in by a dilemma and you don't see any other way out, you must trust in the Lord. Look with the eyes of faith to see him working through your circumstances. Anyone else besides me noticed America's dilemma right now? Whew. It's kind of scary. It's not kind of scary, it is scary. Miss Nell and I were talking about that this week. Never in my life, and I know that my life is not as long as some of you. I haven't lived on this earth as long as some of you have, but never in my life have I ever seen a government regime that is so blatant as this one. First day in office, they shut down the pipeline. They said, we don't care about our borders, any of this stuff. Anybody bought a tank of gas lately? Man, about all those people that were camped out under that bridge in Texas for however long. Man, we're worried about the COVID and the disease and everything, but we're just letting them bring it on in with everything else. Tuberculosis was all but eradicated in the United States of America. It's coming back. Kind of funny how that works. But not just that. Abortion's on the rise. That other stuff that we don't like to talk about is on the rise. It's just, there's everywhere you look. The news, social media. I saw that Trump is launching his own social media. I don't know what that's going to be all about, but everywhere you look, you can see that we are in the midst of a dilemma, and we think it may be the government, we think it may be this or that, but the dilemma is the fact that we're looking at someone to fix it, but we need to be looking at the Lord. Trust in the Lord. Look with the eyes of faith to see him working through these circumstances. He can work through Joe Biden. Do you believe that? He can. He worked through Nebuchadnezzar. There's an entire chapter of the Bible dedicated to what Nebuchadnezzar said. I think he can work through Joe Biden. I think he can work through our government. I think he can work through each and every one of us. He can work through our church, but all we have to do is to look at him. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Verse 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Right there on the lake bank there. Tell them to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I'll harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they'll go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I'm the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh's chariots and horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. Remember, the cloud in the day and fire at night withdrew, went behind them. And the pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. I printed this out this morning. I didn't realize how small the font was, but what would happen is whenever, and we're going to read that here in a minute, whenever Moses sticks the staff out, but what would happen is that it would split, and this is about how far they had to go. Whenever the sea split, you could see through there. Apparently at that point, and they've kind of figured out where they were, the average depth halfway through that area would have been about 40 feet deep. So it would have made kind of a gentle drop over the distance of 3 kilometers of water, and it was temporarily displaced, like the scripture says, and they would have had to walk 5 kilometers to get all the way across. Some people estimate there were between 2 and 3 million people walking with carts and animals and all their belongings and all of that. And so if it would have been narrow, it would have taken a long time, but they estimate that it was probably about 1 kilometer wide is how far the sea parted. And the cool thing is, they believe that the whole group of people, however many of them was, they were in there at the same time. So, and it's not like they all went at the same time, but when the first group of people, or the beginning, or the front of the group of people was at the end, the last people were already in to the sea. So they were all in there at the same time, and they think that it took them 8 to 10 hours. You know why they think that? What does it say right here? Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other. It took them one night to make it all the way through. And somehow, through math and all that, that's how they figured out those dimensions of where, or how big it was and where they were able to go through. All right, so God calls Moses, "Stretch your staff out over the sea, divide the sea, and the people are going to walk on dry ground." Meanwhile, what does it say? That he hardened the heart of the Egyptians, so they're going to chase the Israelites into the sea. I love how it says that he's going to bring himself glory through Pharaoh. God's plan was to bring glory to himself through the actions of those who initially set themselves against him. Remember what I said? The Lord can work through these people in the government. Even if their heart or whatever is set against him, he can use them to bring himself glory. So they marched towards the sea. The angel of the Lord, it says, it kind of confused and blinded the Egyptians so that they couldn't get upon the Israelites. Let's see what it says. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided. The Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on the right and left. Cool thing about this is really God worked 2 miracles. Not only did he split the sea in half, but it says that he dried the ground up. So he split the sea and he dried the ground up so they could walk through there without getting all muddy. I think this is, some people may think it's trivial, but I think it's pretty cool because this is kind of like a surprise level of provision that they never would have expected. Now, I've read this, I don't know how many times, and that just stuck out to me because not only did he split the sea, but they didn't have to trudge through the seabed and the mud and all that to get through. It would have taken a lot longer if they had to. But I just thought that was cool that given the dramatic nature of the parting of the Red Sea, that he was able to dry the ground as well. You know what it makes me think? That when we see the workings of the Lord in our life, whether it's this big, lavish, unexpected miracle, that he's also placing little things in there as well that we can notice. And I'm not equating this with a miracle, but anybody driven by and seen the new roof on the parsonage? It's pretty cool. We decided a few weeks ago something had to be done because when it was raining outside, it was raining inside too, and that wasn't a good thing. So we filed a claim because we've been through quite a few storms lately. And the adjuster comes out, and we got on the roof, and I didn't realize it was this bad, but it was pretty bad. And he said, well, we're going to get you a whole new roof. I said, well, that's cool. Go down, and we're looking at the siding and stuff. And granted, we just filed the claim on the roof. I was looking at the skirting. He said, well, what about this skirting, this underpinning? Did this come down during the storm? And, it's been down for about 5 years now. I said, well, I guarantee you it happened during a storm. He said, all right, and he wrote it down. And they decided they're going to pay for that as well, and we're going to get that fixed with metal, and it's going to look good. But we were focused on one thing, and God said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and take care of this as well. Same thing can happen in a crisis, whether it's a loved one that's in the hospital or things going on at work. God can show up if that's his will. He can show up, and you just have to see all the blessings that go along with that. Verse 23, the Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. And there in the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots, so they had difficulty driving. The Egyptians said, let's get away from these Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Moses had told them, he said, the Lord will fight for you. They saw it in action. Egyptians are hightailing it after them. They're going into pursuit. And it says that God threw them into confusion. He caused the chariot wheels to swerve. And, you got to think about the mindset of the Egyptians, okay? What had they just witnessed in Egypt? Whew! You talk about pain, like the boils, the darkness, the blood, the hail falling from the sky, and the death of the firstborn. They had just witnessed the 10 plagues, and they said, oh no, their God's fighting for them. There ain't nothing we can do. Let's hightail it back to Egypt. That was their plan. They were going to hightail it back to Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak, the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it. The Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back, covered the chariots of the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. That was the knockout punch. They had made up their mind, we're going to hightail it back to Egypt. And basically God's like, you let this get too far, Pharaoh. I get the glory, not Pharaoh. I get the glory. The Egyptian king, whom they worshiped as their greatest god. You had Ra, and then you had Pharaoh. The Egyptian king who had defied the God of creation, get this, were wiped out by God's creation. They defied the God of creation, and they were wiped out by God's creation. Last little part here. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. So they walk out safely on the other side. They see this great power of God. They see the power that was used against the Egyptians, those who did not believe or who defied the Creator, being destroyed by his creation. Likewise, when you receive deliverance from a crisis, you also should remember. So remember that the correct response is to fear the Lord. Take him at his word and take him seriously. Moses did it, albeit there was some struggle in the beginning, remember? Take him at his word and take it seriously. Give him praise. Actually, give him the praise that he is due. And then submit to his agenda. Like I said, oh, how soon we seem to forget. Now, I know that we're not supposed to add anything to the scripture. We're definitely not supposed to take anything away from it. But I think that we could put like an addendum to verse 31. Just 2 words, okay? And tell me if I'm wrong, but we could just put 2 words on the end of verse 31. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant, for what? For now. Right? That's not taking anything away, is it? Because what happened when Moses went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments? He came down, and all that gold that they got from Egypt, they had melted it down. They had fashioned it into this big calf, and they were bowing down and worshiping the thing that they had just created. What about when the 12 spies went into Canaan? I mean, Joshua and Caleb, they came back and said, we got this. The Lord's on our side. What would the rest of them say? They're giants. They're huge. They don't even come up to their knees. We're like grasshoppers. They're giants. What about whenever, later on, Goliath is standing across the battlefield from the entire Israelite army? They sent a little kid out there to fight that battle. Feared the Lord, put their trust in him and Moses, their servant. Those things that I just mentioned, those were all faith-defining moments. When Goliath stood up there and the Israelites were shaking in their armor. You know, whenever Joshua and Caleb get credit because they came back and said, we can do this. But the rest of them, it was a faith-defining moment. When they were given just a little bit of freedom, and Moses was going to get the law of the Lord, the perfection, the 10 Commandments. They were given just a little bit of freedom, and what happened? Those are faith-defining moments. Believe it or not, folks, we are in the midst of a faith-defining moment right now. We got COVID, the economy. This was at Tanton's. I think Doris put that up there. Things are tough. Things aren't going the way that we think they ought to go. Some choices are going to have to be made. And these, if you'll think about it, are really just trivial things. Because there are people out there right now who are lost and dying without the knowledge of the saving grace of Jesus Christ. But some choices are going to have to be made. Will you stand on the side of the Creator? Or will you make the mistake that Egypt made? Or will you make the mistake that Israel made time and time again? We're going to close by reading one passage because I think this sums up everything. Because like I said, we have a choice. Choices are going to have to be made. Pretty soon, I would guess, but then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, the leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but to Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. I then sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. when I brought your people out of Egypt. You came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea, but they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. That's where we are now. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them before you, and you took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, the son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam. So he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. And then you crossed the Jordan. You came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Say that 5 times fast. But I also gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove out before you, and also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land to which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them, and you eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your ancestors, worship beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors serve beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.